Whenever I ask my female clients what their long-term bench press goals and aspirations are, I commonly hear, I want to bench as much as Jen Thompson. Or I get asked, how can I bench as much as Jen Thompson? And while the first few words that come to mind are dedication, hard work, and time, I realize that maybe it would be beneficial for aspiring female powerlifters out there if I broke down Jen's technique in order to reveal how her muscles contribute during the lift. This is my first step in any technique assessment. I explain why the lifter moves the way they do using biomechanical principles of human movement. Using this information, you can then identify the lifter's strengths and weaknesses by looking at how the lifter positions their limb segments relative to the barbell load throughout the range of motion, and by understanding how their muscles contribute differently throughout the lift. So I've started here with my assessment by tracking Jen's bar trajectory during her 142.5 kilo world record attempt at IPF Worlds in the yellow. On the other side of the video, I've traced out her upper and lower arm positions throughout her range of motion. Okay, so you see that she's getting this back and then up bar path in the yellow. So let's start with the bar trajectory. What you see is what I call a back and then up bar path. The angle of posterior displacement towards a face is greatest immediately off the chest. And as she moves through the range of motion, it becomes more and more vertical to approach 90 degrees. I also sometimes measure the amount of posterior displacement, which you'll see in the 0.14 meters. This is a great measurement to use when comparing technique between training sessions or between lifters, loads, and I'll tell you why in a second. Now let's take a minute to go over some biomechanical principles of the bench press. So remember I mentioned that muscle groups will contribute differently throughout the range of motion. So think of the dominating role between chest and tricep contributions to lift as a sliding scale. From off the chest to a couple inches up, the pectoralis major is what I call the make it or break it muscle group. If you fail on your chest or your technique changes in this position more and more as load gets heavier, for example, your bar path trajectory changes here the most, it's highly likely that your chest is your limiting muscle group or it's your weakest link. Then as we get higher and higher up into the lift, the triceps start taking over more and more as that make it or break it muscle group. So if you fail in the higher positions, it can either be because your triceps are your weakest link, or you put your triceps in a mechanically disadvantageous position to finish off the lift. Okay, so this is indicated in the zone of the light blue. Here now are 3 bench press bar path scenarios. When comparing novice versus advanced lifters, novice lifters have a tendency to have bar paths that resemble the one on the right, where it's a straight up. And the more advanced lifters resemble more and more like the pictures on the left. In fact, the biggest benchers in the world, we see just like Jen Thompson, they have the back and then up bar path on the far left. This bar path is actually extremely efficient because it rapidly reduces the distance between the shoulder and the bar, and it gets the bar maximally over the face before the triceps start taking over more and more as that make it or break it muscle group. So it puts the triceps in a really mechanically advantageous position. It's a good position to finish off the top end of the lift. The novice lifter on the far right, in turn, will have a more distinct sticking point during that transition area. So why does this back and then up bar path happen? How do we achieve it? Let's look at Jen's upper and lower arm positions relative to her torso during the press. You can see that she achieves this back and then up bar path by bringing her upper arm towards outwards away from the torso so that it is more perpendicular to it, or rather she flares her elbows out to the side off her chest. So elbow position can tell us a lot about what muscles are contributing during the bench press. And we know that if the muscle is contributing a lot, then it's probably pretty damn strong. So particularly, elbow position will tell us how much the pectoralis major is contributing versus the triceps. So let's watch the full range of motion from a different view. You'll see that Jen brings the bar down nice and controlled. She maintains a very tight position with no wobble during her pause. And during the press, I want you to watch her elbows. Okay, so let me play that one more time. So when Jen presses off the chest, the external moment arm for shoulder adduction actually increases momentarily. Her upper arm is fairly perpendicular to the body. This tells us that her pectoralis, her chest muscles, are doing a lot of the work off the chest because she rapidly increases the loading demands for shoulder horizontal adduction and shoulder adduction. So she controls the bar down to the chest with balance between the triceps and the chest muscles, but then rapidly increases the loading demands on her chest during the range of motion where the pectoralis is that make it or break it muscle group. So not only that, but Jen doesn't even have a big arch. Without arching, what this does is it will increase the range of motion that the chest muscles have to work in. So with arching, it reduces the range of motion that the chest muscles are that primary make it or break it muscle group. So in comparison to a female lifter who has a big arch, Jen has a lot more loading demands on her chest. The big takeaway is that Jen probably has really strong chest muscles, probably the strongest for a female lifter I've ever seen. Now, what this strength also allows her to do is achieve that back and then up bar path. And what that does, remember, it puts the triceps in a mechanically advantageous position to finish off the lift. Her press is smooth as silk because of this bar path efficiency. So we are starting to develop this story that probably strong chest muscles are important for bench press performance. And this is actually reflected in the research. So the first research study we'll talk about, what they found is a strong correlation between chest muscle mass and bench press 1RM. And okay, yes, this makes sense because the more muscle, means more force that we can produce. But if we also go on to the next research study, what they did was they compared lifters' arm positions during the bench press 1RM attempts where they did get the lift versus where they didn't get the lift. So successful versus not successful attempts at their 1RM. And what they found was that when elbow extensor torque was lower and the arms were in a more flared position during the sticking region, they were more likely to get the lift. So if we combine these two studies together, it's likely that the chest muscle strength and 1RM performance is related to the fact the lifter can have their elbows in a more flared position like Jen does during their sticking region because they have the sufficient chest strength to do so, which allows them to have that bar over the face faster during the sticking region, and they're more likely to get the lift. So the moral of the story is, if you have the chest strength to effectively use it off your chest, you achieve a more efficient bar path, which then in turn means a bigger bench press 1RM. And this is exactly what we see in Jen Thompson's lifting mechanics. So to summarize how we can get a big bench press like Jen Thompson, first we need to improve our bar path efficiency. If the lifter has adequate chest strength to do so, it will happen very naturally to achieve Jen's back and then up bar path. This is a sign that then you should probably be focusing on tricep work for your accessory lifts to improve your lockout. If though it's tough for the lifter to get this back and then up bar path, then it's likely that they need to bring up the strength of their chest muscles. So I've included some training recommendations and exercises that you can include in your programming to achieve the chest strength like Jen. So remember, if we reduce our arch or we take away leg drive, this forces the chest to work harder. So also by performing the movements with a more flared position in the mid-range of motion, like with floor presses, we will be able to handle this back and then up bar path position during the sticking point. So whenever we choose our exercises, it's going to be the ones that make the weakest link work harder, because if they're working harder, we're going to get a better training stimulus. For technique considerations, I really like banded work because it reinforces power development and more momentum being generated off the chest, which is then transferred to the top end of the lift. So particularly if you position the band on more of an angle so it's angled towards your belly button, where it'll be resisting your back and then up bar path trajectory, is a really neat variation. So that is everything I have for Jen Thompson's biomechanical breakdown upper bench press. I hope you guys really liked it and you learned a lot. And here's wishing big benches for everyone from Kinetic Advantage Consulting. Thanks.